Hey everyone, welcome back to the Legend of History. Tonight, the rain is falling gently outside my little Minecraft cabin, tapping softly against the pixel windows. There's a candle flickering on the table beside me, and a soft breeze hums through the open doorway. The world feels slow, peaceful, the kind of night that makes you want to breathe deeper and forget the rush of the day. So, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights, pull your blanket a little closer, and let your mind drift into the quiet hum of the story. Our story tonight begins not with chaos, but with stillness, the kind of stillness that's easily disturbed. Alex lived in a small, square apartment on the second floor of an old brick building at the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy. A single bedroom, small kitchen, and a balcony just wide enough for a chair and a potted plant he kept forgetting to water. But it was his. After long nights, driving through the city delivering packages, weaving through empty streets and traffic lights that flickered yellow in the fog, that apartment was the one place where Alex could finally close his eyes and rest. At least, that's how it used to be. The trouble started one Friday night. The neighbor upstairs, a man in his late 20s named Derek, though Alex didn't know his name then, turned up the music a little louder than usual. It was nothing dramatic at first, just bass-heavy pop songs that made the ceiling hum softly. Alex figured it was a weekend thing, shrugged, and put on his noise-canceling headphones. But as the weeks went by, the noise grew worse. Music after midnight, friends shouting and laughing. The thump of footsteps moving from room to room as if they were practicing a marathon upstairs. At first, Alex tried to ignore it. He'd grown up in a busy neighborhood, used to the city's heartbeat, cars, sirens, the occasional argument echoing down an alleyway. But this was different. This was inside his home, invading his peace. The walls seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the party upstairs, and each night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, that bass became the sound of his exhaustion. He tried polite notes, written carefully on sticky paper. "Hey, could you please keep it down after 11? I work nights and need sleep during the morning." "Thanks." He slipped one under the neighbor's door. It vanished the next day, but the music didn't stop. So Alex tried again. A knock at the door, a smile, a calm voice explaining his schedule, his night shifts, how little sleep he got. Derek apologized, said it wouldn't happen again. But 2 days later, the party came back louder than before. Over time, frustration became routine. He'd come home from work, eyes heavy, only to find himself jolted awake hours later by laughter, footsteps, and pounding music. Sometimes he'd call the landlord, but the response was always the same: "I'll talk to him." Yet nothing ever changed. Sleep deprivation does something strange to people. It doesn't just make you tired. It starts to change how you think. You start counting hours instead of days, hearing phantom noises, feeling trapped in your own space. For Alex, every morning became a loop. Stumbling home from the van, eating something quick, crawling into bed, and hoping just maybe today would be quiet. But it never was, until that one night. It was close to 3 in the morning when the bass hit hard enough to make his water glass shake on the nightstand. Alex sat up, hair a mess, eyes hollow. Something inside him just clicked. Not anger, not rage, just quiet determination. A kind of calm clarity that only comes when you've reached the edge and found there's nowhere else to go. He didn't yell, didn't storm upstairs. He just sat there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of the noise, and an odd memory surfaced, a video he'd seen years ago about physics and resonance, about how every structure has a frequency at which it vibrates naturally. A sound too deep to hear, but strong enough to shake. And for the first time in weeks, Alex smiled. The next day, after finishing his delivery route, he didn't go straight home to bed. He stayed up, sipping cheap coffee in a corner diner as dawn stretched across the city, and started researching. He read about buildings, frequencies, and something called vibratory compaction, a process construction workers use to settle concrete evenly. He learned that the building he lived in An older brick design from the late 80s had an ideal resonant frequency of around 9 hertz, low enough that you couldn't hear it, but deep enough to make everything in a small area subtly tremble. That evening, while the city began to buzz again, Alex ordered something online, a small industrial vibration motor used for smoothing concrete. To anyone else, it was just a harmless construction tool. But to Alex, it was a whisper of poetic justice. For the next few days, he waited, sleeping lightly, working his routes, watching the tracking updates. Then, one rainy Thursday morning, the package arrived. He unboxed it carefully, feeling the cold weight of the motor in his hands. It wasn't much to look at, just a metal cylinder with 2 small counterweights and a cord. But in that moment, it felt like holding the key to peace. He set to work immediately, modifying it with a small controller he'd salvaged from an old ceiling fan, then mounting it discreetly under his ceiling, right below where his neighbor's bed likely sat. The final touch was a timer set for 4:59 a.m., when the whole building would be asleep and the world outside completely still. That night, Alex went to bed earlier than usual. For the first time in months, he wasn't dreading the noise. He was waiting for it. The music came, the laughter followed, but his mind was quiet. He drifted into a shallow sleep, knowing what was coming. When the timer clicked on at 4:59, the apartment filled with a deep, low hum, not loud, but heavy, like distant thunder rumbling through the bones of the building. Upstairs, footsteps, then confusion. He smiled into his pillow and closed his eyes. The first hum was gentle, like the faraway purr of a train somewhere underground. At first, Alex wasn't sure it was even working. But then he noticed the faint tremble in the water glass beside his bed, the rippling surface catching the soft light from the window. Above him came a single thump, someone getting up, then another, and another. A set of hurried footsteps, followed by silence. He smiled, rolled onto his side, and drifted off to sleep for the first time in weeks. When he woke around 10, the building felt different, quieter somehow. No music, no echoing laughter, just the muffled murmur of traffic outside and the click of the radiator. Alex brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and for a brief moment allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this tiny act of balance had worked. But he wasn't naive. People like Derek didn't change overnight. That evening, right around the usual time, the music started again, softer at first, then louder as more voices joined in. Bottles clinked, footsteps pounded, someone shouted across the room. Alex sat at his table, sipping coffee and waiting. He didn't get angry anymore. He just watched the clock tick closer to 4:59 a.m. When the timer clicked again, the motor began its low, rhythmic vibration. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone below, but to the floor above, it must have felt like the earth itself was murmuring. Within minutes, he heard the familiar shuffle of feet. Then something new, the scrape of furniture, the slam of a door, the sound of someone knocking on the wall, confused and irritated. For the next few days, the pattern repeated. Chaos at night, confusion at dawn. But as the mornings passed, the nights grew shorter, the parties smaller, and the laughter less certain. Alex started noticing small changes. A once boisterous neighbor now lingered outside the building at sunrise, looking up at his windows with a puzzled expression. The heavy stomping footsteps became lighter, slower. By the end of the week, the noise stopped altogether. Alex didn't celebrate. He just enjoyed the silence, the steady hum of the refrigerator, the soft hiss of rain, the sound of his own breathing. He slept through the day and woke at sunset feeling human again. But then came the knock. It was the landlord, a man in his 50s with a tired smile and a coffee stain on his shirt. "Hey, Alex," he said. "You been hearing any strange noises lately?" Alex blinked. "No, what? Upstairs tenants been complaining. Says the building's vibrating in the mornings. Claims it's haunted or something." The landlord chuckled awkwardly. "Anyway, I'll have someone check the wiring." Alex nodded, all calm composure. "Probably just the pipes," he said. and went back to his coffee. The next morning, he turned off the timer, just for one day, curious what would happen. The silence above lasted through dawn. No footsteps, no shouting. By the second day, though, the noise returned faintly, nervous, restless. He could almost hear the frustration in the way a drawer slammed shut upstairs. So at 4:59 a.m., the hum came back, stronger this time. A thud echoed above. Then pacing. Then nothing. Days rolled by. The neighbor began leaving earlier and earlier in the mornings, dark circles forming under his eyes. A package of soundproofing foam appeared outside his door. Then another. Alex watched with quiet amusement from the mailroom window. 2 weeks later, the landlord knocked again, shaking his head. Guy upstairs says he's moving out. Says this place is cursed. Alex offered a sympathetic nod. That's a shame. He seemed lively. Yeah, well, the landlord sighed. These old buildings do weird things. Anyway, you want first dibs on the vacant unit? I'll give you a discount. Alex smiled faintly. Thanks, but I'm fine right here. That night, he dismantled the device piece by piece, wiping the dust from his hands and setting the metal cylinder gently into a box. He stored it in the back of his closet behind an old jacket, not as a trophy, but as a quiet reminder that balance can be restored without a single raised voice. From then on, the apartment was peaceful again. The mornings were filled only with birdsong from the street trees, the faint buzz of traffic, and the comfortable silence of being truly alone. Sometimes, as the sun rose over the city and light spilled through the blinds, Alex would smile to himself and think of the hum, that deep, invisible vibration that no one could see or trace, the kind that spoke not of anger, but of patience finally rewarded. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't noise or conflict. It's silence. Pure, unshakable silence. And as I sit here in my little Minecraft cabin, the rain still whispering outside and the torches flickering softly, I can't help but feel that same calm. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hums quietly beneath the floorboards, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. So take a deep breath, stretch your fingers, and let the stillness settle in your chest. You've earned your peace tonight. Clara's days at the office began with the same quiet rhythm she had carefully cultivated. A cup of tea in hand, soft music playing through her earbuds, and a calm focus that allowed her to move through emails and spreadsheets without letting the chaos of Mr. Hammond's erratic management disturb her. She had learned to anticipate his moods, the little ways he asserted control, and the tiny cracks in his otherwise intimidating presence. And she began to use this knowledge like a gentle current, guiding events without anyone noticing the direction. Every morning, she would organize her documents with meticulous care, backing up her work in multiple places and quietly observing the patterns of her co-workers, many of whom were too intimidated to stand up to him, but who were watching her with subtle admiration, sensing her quiet confidence. Clara's plan was slow and deliberate. She didn't need to rush, because she knew that true satisfaction comes from letting the pieces fall naturally into place. She began inserting tiny, almost invisible errors into reports she knew Mr. Hammond would present to the board, small enough that no one else could spot them at first glance, but precise enough that they would slowly unravel his reputation over time. Meanwhile, she made sure her own work was flawless, organized in such a way that the timing, authorship, and logic of each idea were clearly documented. She even started to pay closer attention to the office's subtle ecosystem, which meetings he preferred to dominate, which co-workers he relied on for information, and which channels of communication he never questioned. By observing quietly and intervening strategically, Clara created a kind of gentle web, invisible to the untrained eye, that slowly surrounded Mr. Hammond's authority. Day by day, small doubts began to ripple through the office. A miscalculated figure here, an overlooked note there. Nothing anyone could immediately blame him for, but enough that questions started to arise. Clara's co-workers whispered quietly to one another, sharing their suspicions in hushed tones over coffee or during brief moments by the copier. Each small revelation adding weight to the slow, building sense that perhaps Mr. Hammond's brilliance wasn't as flawless as he claimed. Clara herself never spoke a word to tarnish his reputation. She simply continued her work, leaving trails of documented truth and subtle evidence wherever she could. Even the office plants, placed strategically near his workspace, seemed to mark her presence as unobtrusive but watchful, adding to the calm, persistent observation that defined her every day. And through it all, Clara found an odd kind of peace. She wasn't acting out of malice, but from a quiet, patient sense of justice, the kind that doesn't need dramatic confrontation or loud declarations, only careful timing and careful attention to detail. Every morning, she would sip her tea, glance at the soft lights spilling across the cubicles, and feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that the world was gradually, inevitably aligning with the truth. Yet, even as the first small cracks appeared in Mr. Hammond's polished facade, the real turning point had not yet come. Clara's patience, her careful observation, and her quiet orchestration had set the stage, but the climax of her plan, the moment when the world would finally take notice, was still ahead, waiting for the precise alignment of timing, opportunity, and the subtle, inexorable unfolding of consequences. And as she filed another report, reviewed another spreadsheet, and walked the quiet hallways of the office, she knew that the slow hum of justice was already moving beneath the surface, invisible but unstoppable, carrying her story forward toward the moment when balance would finally be restored. As the days drifted by in the quiet hum of the office, Clara's plan continued to unfold with the slow precision of a clockwork mechanism, each small misstep by Mr. Hammond gently nudging the balance ever so slightly in her favor. The subtle errors she had planted began to accumulate, unnoticed by most, but forming an invisible thread that slowly wove itself into a pattern only someone attentive enough could perceive. Clara moved with deliberate calm, reviewing each report before it left her desk, ensuring her work remained impeccable while the seeds of gentle disruption took root elsewhere. She noticed the way Mr. Hammond would grow increasingly flustered during meetings, his forced confidence slipping in tiny, almost imperceptible ways, an unusual hesitation when he tried to explain figures, a momentary pause before responding to a question, or a slightly awkward adjustment of his tie. His colleagues began to notice, too, their casual observations of inconsistencies and discrepancies quietly coalescing into whispered questions over coffee, quiet emails exchanged in hushed tones, and subtle glances that spoke volumes. Clara herself maintained an air of serene normality, never acknowledging the chaos she was quietly orchestrating, her soft-spoken manners and gentle efficiency creating a contrast that made Mr. Hammond's faltering composure all the more visible. One particularly slow afternoon, as rain drizzled softly against the office windows, Clara discovered yet another small mistake, one that Mr. Hammond had been relying on to impress a client, and she realized this tiny detail could be the tipping point in her carefully woven plan. Rather than acting immediately, she let the moment linger, observing the unfolding effects as her co-workers began to notice the error themselves, their questions and concerns gently amplifying the growing cracks in his authority. Even as the subtle tension in the office increased, Clara's inner calm remained unshaken. She took quiet satisfaction in the patient rhythm of the unfolding drama, knowing that each piece of her plan was falling into place at the perfect pace. She continued to document everything meticulously, each timestamp file, each careful note, forming a silent ledger of truth that could not be disputed when the time came. Meanwhile, Mr. Hammond's frustration became more visible, though still wrapped in a veneer of professional pride. He attempted to overcompensate, calling more meetings, insisting on revising reports himself, and micromanaging every detail in a desperate attempt to regain control, But every action only served to highlight the growing inconsistencies in his work. Clara, in contrast, moved through her days with a graceful patience, sipping tea in quiet moments, letting the rain patter against the windows, and feeling the gentle satisfaction of watching her plan advance almost imperceptibly. The office, once a place of subtle tension under his domineering presence, began to shift in atmosphere. Co-workers shared small, quiet smiles, exchanged knowing nods, and allowed themselves a hint of relief in the calm efficiency Clara exuded, even as they watched the unraveling of authority above them. And yet, despite the growing tension and the near-visible cracks in Mr. Hammond's polished facade, Clara knew the climax was still ahead. The moment when patience, observation, and subtle orchestration would converge to reveal the full truth. The slow hum of justice continued beneath the surface, unseen by most, a quiet force steadily moving toward its inevitable conclusion, while Clara, serene and composed, simply carried on, knowing that the world was gradually, inevitably aligning with the subtle balance she had created, each moment a testament to the power of quiet persistence and carefully measured timing. The following week unfolded like a slow-moving tide, each day carrying small but significant shifts in the office atmosphere, and Clara watched with quiet satisfaction as her subtle orchestration began to show its effects in ways both delicate and undeniable. Mr. Hammond, once so meticulously composed and confident, now moved with a restless energy, pacing the hallways with barely concealed frustration, checking his emails repeatedly, and reviewing reports with an obsessive intensity that made the office air feel slightly heavier, as if tension itself had taken shape and settled over every cubicle. Clara continued her gentle vigilance, observing patterns, noting habits, and strategically allowing small, almost imperceptible mistakes to surface in his work at precisely the right moments. Errors that were easily traced back to the sources he had attempted to claim as his own. Her co-workers, who had been quietly watching, began to sense a change. Hushed whispers over shared printers, cautious nods across the coffee machine, and subtle comments in meetings all hinted at growing unease, though no one dared speak too openly about it, and certainly not to Mr. Hammond himself. Each morning, Clara arrived with a calm that contrasted starkly with the growing storm above her, a soft mug of tea in hand, quietly reviewing her own flawless work and letting the natural flow of events reveal the results of her careful preparation. One particularly gray afternoon, when the rain tapped gently against the windows in an almost hypnotic rhythm, Clara noticed something remarkable. A client had questioned a report Mr. Hammond had submitted, pointing out a discrepancy he had confidently presented as his own insight, and now the board was beginning to ask for explanations. She did not intervene immediately. She allowed the situation to breathe, to expand naturally, watching the subtle panic spread across his carefully maintained composure. Mr. Hammond's face, once a mask of unshakable authority, now flickered with doubt and frustration, his carefully constructed reputation slowly revealing the cracks that had been quietly forming for weeks. Clara's heart remained steady, her calmness almost meditative as she observed the perfect unfolding of her patient work, the slow but inevitable reckoning that comes from precision, attention, and timing. She began to notice how the office dynamics shifted even further. Co-workers, previously cautious and timid under his dominance, now exchanged glances that carried quiet encouragement, subtle smiles that acknowledged the slow erosion of fear, and gentle acknowledgments of Clara's serene presence, all while Mr. Hammond struggled to regain control and narrative that was quietly slipping from his grasp. As the hours stretched into late afternoons, small victories accumulated. Emails that revealed the truth of authorship, spreadsheets that clearly documented the origin of each idea, and a slow, relentless exposure of inconsistencies that Mr. Hammond had never anticipated. And yet, even with the growing awareness of his mistakes, Clara did not rush. she did not gloat or declare triumph. Her satisfaction came from a measured progression of events, the quiet unfolding of justice in a rhythm as natural and soothing as the rain outside. The office seemed to breathe differently, a subtle calm seeping into the space where tension had once ruled, while Mr. Hammond's attempts to assert dominance only highlighted the cracks that Clara had so patiently cultivated. By the end of the day, the subtle web of evidence she had woven left no doubt that a reckoning was approaching, the culmination of weeks of observation, planning, and gentle orchestration, but it was not yet fully realized. Clara's story, like the rain outside the window, flowed steadily, patiently, with a calm inevitability that promised resolution without force, proving once again that the most satisfying outcomes are often those that arrive quietly, measuredly, and with perfect timing. And as she left the office that evening, soft lights spilling across the quiet streets, Clara felt a sense of serenity and anticipation, knowing that the final act, the full revelation and ultimate balance of justice, was drawing near, waiting for the precise moment to unfold in its complete, unhurried beauty. The final week arrived with a quiet tension that hummed beneath the fluorescent lights, and Clara, calm as ever, observed the office with serene patience, knowing that the slow, meticulous work of the past weeks was finally about to pay off. Mr. Hammond, now visibly strained and increasingly disoriented, tried desperately to maintain his polished facade, but every report he submitted, every presentation he delivered, seemed to reveal just a bit more of the cracks Clara had quietly nurtured. The executives, who had previously been impressed by his apparent brilliance, now began to notice a pattern of inconsistencies, a trail of subtle errors, and an unmistakable evidence of misattribution that no one could ignore. Clara, with her impeccable timing, finally presented the compiled documentation she had been building all along. Every timestamp file, every report, every email, each clearly showing the origin of the ideas, calculations, and strategies that Mr. Hammond had been claiming as his own. There was no fanfare, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet, undeniable presentation of the truth. One by one, the executives examined the records, their expressions softening from surprise to understanding and finally to quiet approval. Mr. Hammond, flustered and speechless, attempted to explain himself, but the calm clarity of Clara's organized evidence left no room for his usual excuses. The room, once thick with tension, seemed to breathe collectively as balance was restored. Co-workers who had whispered behind closed doors now exchanged relieved glances, and the oppressive weight of his domineering presence lifted, leaving space for the quiet, steady rhythm of respectful collaboration. Clara did not revel in his humiliation or seek revenge in anger. Instead, she returned to her work, serene and composed, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips as she sipped her tea and allowed the soft hum of the office to envelop her. The poetic justice she had orchestrated was subtle, elegant, and complete, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply satisfying in its quiet inevitability. And as the rain finally stopped outside the office windows, sunlight spilling gently across the city streets, Clara's story reached its natural conclusion, a perfect testament to the power of patience, observation, and calm persistence. Justice, when executed with care and precision, need not shout to be felt, and sometimes the quietest actions leave the most lasting mark. With that, the office returned to its gentle rhythm, the hum of computers and the soft shuffle of papers creating a peaceful soundtrack to a world now quietly balanced, leaving Clara, and those who had witnessed her subtle mastery, with a sense of serene closure, the kind that settles over you like a warm blanket on a rainy evening, soft, comforting, and undeniably satisfying. Tonight, let's drift into another story. The rain had just stopped when Michael stepped off the last bus of the night. The air smelled like wet pavement and distant lilac, and the yellow streetlights reflected in tiny puddles that lined the old cobblestone lane. He pulled his hood up, holding a small paper bag close to his chest. Inside were the seeds of something rare, something he'd searched half his life for: the blue ghost orchid. To anyone else, they were just strange pale roots sealed in damp moss. But to Michael they were a promise, a quiet miracle waiting to happen. He was a gardener, not by trade, but by heart, and every inch of his little rooftop plot was a reflection of that love. He didn't have much in his life. A modest job at the city archives, a studio apartment that leaked when it rained, and this rooftop where he had spent countless nights kneeling in soil under the glow of string lights, coaxing green things to grow among the gray skyline. But lately, something had been missing. The world below had grown louder, harsher. Car horns, construction, arguments echoing up the walls, and the rooftop that once felt like an escape had started to feel like an island slowly sinking beneath the noise. That's when he'd read about the ghost orchid, a plant said to bloom only in silence, to feed not on sunlight, but on the air itself. People said it thrived where peace was strongest. And maybe, deep down, Michael needed to prove that such a place could still exist, even here. So that night, as the clouds thinned and moonlight began to trace silver along the rooftops, he prepared a pot of soft bark and moss, whispering to himself that every quiet place deserved a second chance. Days passed. The city continued its restless rhythm, and Michael continued his careful rituals, watering by dawn, misting at dusk, talking softly to the plants as though they could hear him. The ghost orchid didn't sprout, not at first. Weeks turned to months. Friends told him to give up, to plant something real, something practical. But Michael kept tending to it, night after night. He didn't realize that others had begun to notice. The elderly woman across the street who watched from her balcony, the janitor who worked the night shift in the building next door, even the stray cat that started sleeping near his pots. One by one, people began to stop by the rooftop, quietly, respectfully, just to see this man who believed in something invisible. They'd bring him seeds, coffee, little notes of encouragement. The garden grew wilder, fuller, and somehow the rooftop began to hum with life again. And then, one late evening, when the sky was purple and the city below was wrapped in the hum of streetlights, he saw it, a faint shimmer rising from the moss, like fog in reverse. The ghost orchid had bloomed. Its petals were almost translucent, catching light from nowhere, glowing faintly in the still air. For a moment, Michael didn't breathe. All the noise of the city faded. It felt as if time itself had stopped to watch something fragile being born. He sat there in silence, tears on his cheeks, realizing that sometimes the quiet you seek isn't about escaping the noise. It's about creating peace in the middle of it. That night, he left the rooftop light burning, not for the orchid, but for anyone who might be looking up from the street, needing proof that beauty can still bloom in forgotten corners. The ghost orchid's bloom didn't just change Michael's nights, it changed the rooftop itself. Within a week, the once lonely garden began to attract gentle company. It started with Mrs. Harlow, the elderly woman across the street. Every morning, she'd water her tiny balcony plants and glance toward Michael's rooftop, squinting to see if the strange flower was real or a trick of the light. One morning, she called across the gap between buildings, her voice thin and cheerful. "It's beautiful," she said, "whatever it is you've grown up there." Michael smiled back, lifting his mug of tea in a silent toast. From that day on, she began leaving small gifts by his door, cuttings from her herbs, tiny jars of honey, handwritten notes folded neatly like pressed petals. Then came Ravi, the janitor from the next building over, who often climbed the fire escape after his late shift just to breathe before heading home. He noticed the glow from Michael's rooftop one night and wandered over, shy but curious. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" he asked, setting down his mop bucket. They didn't talk much at first, just shared the silence, the soft hum of the city, and the scent of wet soil. Over time, Ravi began bringing stories instead of silence. Tales of his village back home, of monsoon rains and mango trees heavy with fruit. In exchange, Michael shared packets of seeds and stories about the plants he nurtured. A friendship grew in that quiet place, rooted in tired hands and mutual understanding. As weeks turned into months, the rooftop became something more than a garden. It became a kind of sanctuary, a space that didn't belong to the noise below. The stray cat returned often now, curling in the shade of the flower pots, purring like a soft engine. Mrs. Harlow's herbs thrived in the corner boxes. Ravi built a small wooden bench from discarded pallets. Every time someone new visited, they left something behind, a little bit of care, a bit of themselves. Michael's quiet world was slowly knitting together the broken threads of the city. And yet, beneath the peace, there was change stirring. The building's landlord, a sharp-suited man named Harris, had started noticing that tenants from other blocks were visiting that messy roof. He didn't like it. To him, rooftops were meant for maintenance crews, not gatherings. He sent a letter one morning, terse and final. Unauthorized use of rooftop space will not be tolerated. Michael read it in silence, feeling the weight of all those evenings pressing on his chest. For a moment, the garden seemed to dim. Even the ghost orchid appeared less bright. That night, he sat alone beneath the stars, the city wind colder than usual. He could have taken everything down, the pots, the lights, the little bench. But instead, he looked at the orchid and whispered, maybe peace has to fight for its place too. He wrote a letter in return, calm but firm, explaining how the garden had reduced noise complaints, built community, even improved the rooftops insulation. He included photos, not just of the plants, but of the people smiling there. He slid the letter under the landlord's office door and went to bed without hope. Days passed with no reply. But then, one Friday evening, Harris appeared on the rooftop himself. He stood stiffly, arms crossed, surveying the mismatched pots and repurposed crates. "It's different," he said finally. Michael nodded, unsure what to say. The landlord crouched, touching a leaf. "My wife used to grow tomatoes on our balcony," he murmured. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Harris sighed, straightened, and said, "Keep it tidy, and make sure no one falls." It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it was permission. That small mercy changed everything. Word spread quietly, and more neighbors began visiting the rooftop. There were quiet book readings under fairy lights, slow tea nights with gentle music, and Sunday mornings when Mrs. Harlow's granddaughter painted watercolors of the ghost orchid. People began calling it the garden at the edge of the city. Michael would sit with them all, smiling softly, watering his plants, listening as laughter replaced sirens in the air above. And late one night, as fog rolled over the skyline and the hum of the city dulled to a whisper, he noticed something strange. The ghost orchid had spread. Tiny offshoots glowed faintly in the soil near other plants, like stars scattered across the dark earth. It was as though the flower had decided to share its light. Michael realized then that it wasn't just silence that made it bloom. It was connection, compassion, and the way people's quiet hearts had come together here. He leaned back against the bench, the cat curling beside him, and closed his eyes. The rain began again, soft, steady, rhythmic, and the rooftop breathed in unison with the city below. The orchid's pale glow reflected in the puddles, flickering gently like lanterns of peace. Sometimes, Michael thought, miracles don't arrive in grand bursts. Sometimes they grow leaf by leaf, conversation by conversation, until one night you look around and realize you're not alone anymore. The rooftop garden had become more than a refuge. It was slowly turning into a rhythm that pulsed through the neighborhood, a quiet heartbeat that even the city couldn't drown out. At first, it was subtle. The barista at the cafe across the street started leaving her phone behind during breaks, choosing instead to sip coffee and watch the golden vines dancing in the breeze. A group of tired nurses, who worked the overnight shift at the nearby hospital, began stopping by after dawn, their scrubs smelling faintly of disinfectant and lavender hand cream. They'd sit in silence on the bench, eyes half closed, faces soft in the morning light. The rooftop became their hidden sanctuary, a pause between the exhaustion of work and the chaos of home. Michael never said much. He would just nod as they arrived, set out a tray of steaming tea, and let them have the peace they needed. Somehow that was enough. And soon, word spread even further. A local artist heard rumors about a glowing flower that bloomed above the city and came with her sketchbook, expecting an urban legend. But when she saw it, the ghost orchid shining softly like captured moonlight, she didn't speak for several minutes. Later, her paintings began appearing in cafe windows and online galleries. Images of hope hidden in concrete, of light blooming from loneliness. She never named Michael or the rooftop, but everyone who saw the art said they could feel the story behind it. By autumn, something began to change in the air. Neighbors who had never spoken before started greeting each other in the hallways. Children left hand-painted rocks on doorsteps with kind messages. A man who had once complained about every sound in the building began volunteering to fix things for free. Nobody could say exactly why the mood had shifted, but those who had visited the rooftop, even once, seemed to carry a trace of that calm back with them. Meanwhile, Michael's nights grew quieter inside his mind. The insomnia that had haunted him for years seemed to fade, replaced by a deep, steady rhythm that matched the rain on his windows. The ghost orchid had become his silent companion, its petals glowing faintly even when the moon was hidden. He began to talk to it sometimes, not in a strange way, but like someone talking to an old friend. "You've done more good than I ever planned," he'd whisper. "You've taught me that quiet isn't the absence of life. It's where life gathers its strength." But peace, as always, attracted attention. One gray morning, as Michael watered the garden, two men in formal suits appeared at the building entrance. They were from a real estate development firm. Harris, the landlord, had been in contact with them. The area, once ignored, was now valuable, and they wanted to renovate the block into luxury apartments. The rooftop garden, they said, was an obstacle. They wanted the space cleared for inspection. Michael listened, his heart sinking as he stared at the orchids and vines that had become his family. He didn't argue. He simply asked for time. Just until the end of the season, he said quietly. They gave him 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks passed like a memory fading too soon. People came in waves. The barista, the nurses, Mrs. Harlow and her granddaughter, Robbie the janitor, even Harris, who lingered longer than he admitted to anyone. Each person seemed to sense what was happening, though no one said the word end. They just came to sit, to breathe, to remember. On the last evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Michael lit small candles around the rooftop. The air smelled like soil, wax, and faint jasmine. People gathered silently, the way you do at the end of a song you don't want to stop. Someone brought a guitar and played softly, the notes blending with the whisper of the wind. Mrs. Harlow read a poem about roots and wings. Robbie laughed about how he couldn't grow a cactus to save his life. And for one perfect hour, the rooftop felt like its own little world, untouched by deadlines, noise, or greed. When the candles burned low, Michael stood up and thanked everyone. "Maybe they can take the space," he said, "but not what it became." He smiled at the ghost orchid, its glow brighter than ever. Light doesn't need walls. That night, after everyone left, Michael stayed alone. He didn't sleep. He just sat with the orchid under the stars until the sky began to pale. Then, quietly, he took a small clay pot, gently scooped out one of the orchid's new shoots, and placed it inside. He wrapped it with care, like a secret. The next morning, when the developers arrived, the rooftop was empty. The plants were gone, the bench cleared, the lights packed away. All that remained was the faint outline of where life had once grown, and a single note pinned to the door. It read, Things that bloom in silence never really disappear. Michael didn't vanish, though. In the days that followed, people began to notice something strange across the city. Tiny rooftop gardens started appearing on cafes, apartment blocks, even schools. Some had glowing white flowers. Some had none. But all had the same stillness, the same quiet peace. And every person who tended them said they didn't know who started it. But if you asked Mrs. Harlow, she'd smile and whisper, "It's the man from the rooftop, the one who taught the city how to listen." It began as a rumor whispered in passing, like the wind that drifts through narrow alleys after rain. Some said a mysterious gardener had appeared on rooftops across the city, planting pale, white flowers that glowed faintly under the moon. Others said it wasn't a person at all, just kindness taking root wherever exhaustion had once lived. But whatever the truth, within months, rooftops began to change. What used to be bare tar and rusted vents now sprouted color and life. And in the middle of every one, there was always one flower that shone a little brighter, a descendant of Michael's ghost orchid. Michael himself had quietly left the city. No one knew where he went. Some thought he moved to the coast. Others swore they saw him tending a small greenhouse behind a library miles away. In truth, he had followed the sound of the sea, that endless hum that matched the rhythm of his rooftop rains. He rented a tiny cottage near the cliffs, where the air smelled of salt and rosemary, and began again with just a few pots of soil and that single glowing sprout. It wasn't a grand plan, just the simple need to nurture something living. And somehow, the world found him anyway. The artist who had once painted the rooftop tracked him down first. She arrived one breezy afternoon, sketchbook in hand, cheeks pink from the climb. "I never forgot the way that flower looked," she said. "I've painted it 100 times, but none of them felt alive until now." Michael smiled, offering her tea as the waves murmured below. He didn't realize that the drawing she made that day would later hang in a seaside gallery, quiet, glowing pieces that drew travelers from far away. People began asking about the garden at the edge of the city, and the story traveled farther than Michael ever intended. Soon, letters began to arrive, not to the city rooftop, but to the small post office near his cottage. Handwritten envelopes from strangers. Teachers wanting to bring calm to their classrooms. Retirees turning balconies into sanctuaries. Young people in high-rise apartments longing for peace above the noise. Michael answered each one slowly, carefully, often by candlelight. He didn't offer instructions, just reflections. Thoughts about patience, roots, and the way silence can heal when tended with care. His words found their way into online forums, community bulletins, and late-night podcasts that read them aloud. People began to plant their own listening gardens, naming them after the story they'd heard. Back in the city, something miraculous happened. Harris, the landlord who once saw only profit, stood one evening on his balcony, staring at the skyline. In every direction, he could see tiny sparks of green, pockets of light where rooftops glowed faintly against the dark. He thought of Michael, of the night he'd touched that leaf, and remembered his wife's tomatoes. For the first time in years, he felt proud, not of the buildings he owned, but of what had grown on top of them. He started a fund to supply soil and seeds to tenants who wanted to build rooftop gardens. It wasn't charity, he said. It's good for the buildings. But everyone who knew him smiled quietly, because they could tell he'd been changed, too. As winter settled over the city, the ghost orchids didn't die. They shimmered through the frost, delicate but unbroken, like living snowflakes clinging to steel. Commuters walking to work would glance up and, for a brief moment, forget the weight of their day. Some swore that when the train slowed near certain neighborhoods, you could see whole clusters of rooftops glowing together, pulsing faintly like constellations in reverse, stars, not in the sky, but growing from the earth. Meanwhile, on the coast, Michael watched the tides shift. His own garden had grown wild, herbs spilling over planters, vines crawling up driftwood poles, and seagulls perching like lazy guardians. He never meant to start movement. All he wanted was quiet. But one evening, as the sun sank into the sea, he realized that maybe peace, once shared, becomes something else entirely. Not just rest, but renewal. The wind carried salt across the garden, and he breathed it in, feeling the stillness inside him ripple like the tide. Then, one letter arrived that was different. It was written on thick paper in careful script, postmarked from across the ocean, a small town in Japan. The sender, a librarian named Aiko, had read about his rooftop gardens and wanted to create one atop her library, a place for readers and dreamers to breathe. She asked if he could send a cutting of the ghost orchid. Michael hesitated, not because he was possessive, but because he wasn't sure the flower would survive such a long journey. Still, he prepared one small piece, wrapped it gently in damp cloth, and mailed it with a note that read, "This flower only blooms in stillness. Let the world around it slow down, and it will find the light." Months later, a photograph arrived, a simple rooftop in a quiet town, bathed in moonlight. In the center, glowing faintly like a promise, was the ghost orchid, blooming again. Behind it stood a small group of people, readers, children, a janitor, an old woman, all smiling softly at the camera. And in that moment, Michael knew the light had traveled farther than he ever could. And far across the sea, in cities and towns that had never heard of him, rooftops began to glow. Not because of magic or fame or wealth, but because someone, somewhere, remembered the feeling of peace that came from a man, a garden, and a single flower that taught them all to listen. As the morning light finally spilled through the dense canopy, its golden touch broke apart the long shadows that had ruled the night. The forest, once heavy with the sighs of unseen spirits, now breathed with calmness and renewal. But for Thomas and Amelia, this sunrise felt different. It carried the weight of understanding, of endings, and of beginnings yet unseen. They walked together down the moss-covered path, where dew clung to each blade of grass like tiny glass beads. Thomas held his lantern low, though it was no longer needed. Its light trembled faintly, casting soft reflections on the ground. The once distant hum that haunted the woods had vanished, leaving only the gentle music of birds beginning their morning songs. Yet, deep in their hearts, both knew that something in the forest still watched, something ancient, something grateful. Amelia stopped where the old willow tree stood, the same one where they had first heard the whispering voice. Its branches swayed without wind, as if bowing to them. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice barely above the whisper of leaves. Thomas looked up at the tree, his eyes calm now, not searching for fear, but for meaning. "I think it was never about ending," he said softly. The forest only wanted to be heard. A quiet breeze curled around them, carrying the faint scent of cedar and rain. It felt like a sigh, peaceful, released. The ground beneath the willow shimmered faintly as the sunlight caught something buried there. The corner of an old wooden box, edges softened by time. Amelia knelt and brushed away the dirt. Inside were small trinkets, a child's wooden horse, a rusted compass, and a folded note, the ink nearly faded. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was trembling but deliberate. "To those who find this, thank you. We were the ones who couldn't leave. The forest kept our memories safe." Thomas exhaled, eyes closing for a moment as if he could feel the pulse of the forest in that single line. Amelia pressed the note against her chest, her voice trembling, so the voices were never angry. "No," Thomas replied. "They were lonely. They decided to leave the box as it was, covered it again with soft earth, and stood in silence, a quiet moment of farewell. The air shimmered briefly, a ripple of light moving through the branches, like sunlight through water. For an instant, they both saw figures soft, translucent, smiling, before fading into the morning air. When they turned back toward the village path, the world already looked different. The forest no longer loomed like a shadowed presence. It felt alive, awake, breathing along with them. Even the smallest things, the crunch of leaves beneath their boots, the distant call of a bird, seemed touched by something sacred. As they neared the edge of the woods, Thomas spoke quietly, almost to himself. Perhaps every forest has its memories, and maybe every person does too. The only difference is whether we choose to listen. Amelia nodded, glancing back one last time. Then let's keep listening, she said. They stepped beyond the tree line, just as the first rays of full sunlight painted the fields in gold. The wind followed them, soft, steady, carrying the faintest echo of that whisper that had begun everything. Thank you. And for a moment, Thomas could swear the forest smiled. The day stretched before them, open, bright, and waiting for new stories to unfold. Because in the world of legends of the story, every ending is just the start of another whisper waiting to be heard. Thank you for listening. As the night settles and the last whispers of Somnora fade into memory, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. We've wandered through quiet forests, climbed moonlit hills, and drifted among glowing ribbons of dreams. We've seen patience restore balance, justice unfold quietly, and gentle care ripple across unseen worlds. If tonight's stories brought you a moment of calm, a feeling of peace, or a soft smile as you listened, then I'm truly glad. That is the magic of storytelling, to transport us, to soothe us, and to remind us of the beauty in small, quiet acts. Here at the Legend of History, we share stories that linger in the mind like gentle melodies, tales of mystery, wonder, and subtle justice, perfect for unwinding after a long day or drifting into sleep. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. Click the bell icon, and you'll be quietly reminded when a new tale is ready to carry you into another world. Leave a comment if a story touched your heart, or if you have a favorite story you'd like us to tell next. Every story grows stronger when it is shared, just like the dreams in Somnora. And now, as you tuck in, take a deep breath, feel your shoulders release their tension, and let the quiet of the night embrace you. Close your eyes and know that somewhere, hidden worlds are alive with dreams being tended by patient hands, just like yours. Thank you for being part of this calm journey tonight. Until the next story, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, even the smallest acts of care can echo farther than you can imagine. Good night.